Hello and welcome. We are about to dive into a fascinating scientific detective story, one that really sits at the crossroads of virology, our immune systems, and brain health. And the best part? This whole story, well, it started with a complete accident.
So let me just ask you this. What if a key to fighting dementia, one of the most feared diseases out there, was actually hiding in plain sight? What if it was a vaccine for a painful skin rash? It sounds almost too strange to be true, right? Well, let's unpack how scientists stumbled onto this incredible connection.
Here's the journey we're going to take together. We'll start with that very first unexpected clue. Then, we'll head over to Wales to look at what's basically a perfect natural experiment. We'll see how the evidence started to pile up, then we'll get into the really cool stuff. How could this possibly work? We'll also check out the newer vaccine technology, and finally, we'll talk about what all of this means for the future of brain health.
Look, there's no question dementia is a huge health challenge all over the world. For years, the research has been laser-focused on the usual suspects, things like amyloid plaques and tau tangles in the brain. But then, a series of totally unexpected findings forced researchers to look in a completely new direction, at our own immune system and the viruses that have been living inside us all along.
And it all begins with this character right here, the varicella zoster virus, or VZV. Now, most of us know it as chickenpox from when we were kids. But here's the thing. After you get over chickenpox, the virus doesn't actually leave your body. No, it goes into hiding. It lies dormant in your nerve cells for your entire life. Then, decades later, when our immune systems get a little weaker with age, it can wake up, causing that incredibly painful rash we call shingles. And that moment of reawakening, that's the key to this whole story.
So how in the world do you prove a link between a shingle shot and dementia? I mean, ideally, you'd need a massive, perfectly controlled study. Or you could just get really, really lucky. And that's what happened. Back in 2013, a public health policy in Wales accidentally set up the perfect conditions to study this exact question.
It was pretty simple, really. Because of how they rolled out the program, they had this really strict age cutoff. If you were 79 years old, you could get the vaccine. But if you had just had your 80th birthday, you missed the window. So suddenly, you have two almost identical groups of people. The only real difference between them was a few weeks in age and whether or not they got the shot. For scientists, this was an absolute goldmine.
So what did they find when they looked at the data? The results were pretty stunning. Over the next 7 years, the group that got the shingles vaccine, they had a 20% lower risk of being diagnosed with dementia. A 20% drop from a single vaccine. Okay, now that was a finding that people had to pay attention to.
Now, that Welsh study was powerful, for sure. But in science, one study is never the final word. It's a clue, not a conclusion. You absolutely need replication. So researchers all over the world started digging into these huge health databases to see if the signal from Wales would show up in other places with other people.
And what happened next was just this flood of data. You had studies looking at healthcare systems in California, millions upon millions of Medicare records in the US, even the super detailed genetic data from the UK Biobank. And you know what? They all started pointing in the exact same direction. Let's take a look at the numbers.
One of the first big ones was from Southern California, and this one was looking at the newer, more effective shingles vaccine. And what they found was a massive 51% lower risk of a dementia diagnosis. 51%. That's more than double the effect they first saw back in Wales.
And the evidence just kept coming. A huge study of over 1.5 million U.S. Medicare beneficiaries came next. And again, the result was crystal clear and statistically significant. A 33% lower risk of all-cause dementia for folks who got the full 2 doses. The case was just getting stronger and stronger.
I mean, the consistency here is just remarkable. In the UK Biobank study, they were able to control for the ApoE4 gene, which is a major genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's. And even after accounting for that, they still found a 32% lower risk among vaccinated people. This was huge because it proved the effect was real and not just something that could be explained away by genetics.
Okay, so the data is pretty compelling, right? The vaccine is clearly linked to a lower risk of dementia. But how? What's the biology here? What's actually going on? Well, the leading suspect is a process that scientists are now realizing is at the root of a lot of age-related diseases. And that suspect is something called neuroinflammation. You can think of it like a low-level chronic fire that's just simmering away in the brain. So when that shingles virus reactivates, it triggers this massive immune response, and that floods the brain with inflammatory signals. This damages neurons and is now seen as a key driver of Alzheimer's. So the logic is simple.
If you prevent the virus from waking up, you prevent that inflammatory storm from ever happening.
So how exactly does the virus cause all this trouble? Well, there are two main theories. The first one is pretty straightforward. The shingles virus wakes up, it causes inflammation in the brain, and that directly damages brain cells. Simple enough. But the second theory, this one is even more interesting. It suggests the shingles virus might just be an accomplice, waking up another sleeping virus that might be an even bigger player in Alzheimer's.
And they call this the accomplice theory. In lab studies using these amazing 3D models of brain tissue, researchers saw it happen. The shingles virus, VZV, wakes up and creates this inflammatory environment. That inflammation then acts like an alarm clock for another virus we all carry, herpes simplex 1, the one that causes cold sores. And it's this newly awakened HSV1 that seems to kick off the production of amyloid and tau, the toxic proteins that are the hallmarks of Alzheimer's. So by getting the shingles vaccine, you stop VZV from ever waking up its dangerous partner.
Now, here's a really important detail. Most of these incredible findings, including that original study in Wales, were based on an older type of shingles vaccine. But back in 2017, a brand new, far more advanced vaccine called Shingrix came out, and it looks like it might be even better at protecting the brain.
The big difference really comes down to the technology. The older vaccine, Zostavax, used a weakened but still live virus. The new one, Shingrix, is what's called a recombinant vaccine. It just uses a tiny piece of the virus's protein, and it combines that with a powerful booster called an adjuvant to really wake up the immune system. Its efficacy against shingles is over 90%, and the early data suggests its protective effect against dementia is even stronger than the old vaccines. And get this, the benefits don't seem to stop at the brain. By tamping down that systemic inflammation caused by the virus reactivating, the vaccine is linked to incredible benefits all over the body. Studies are now showing a 25% lower risk of major cardiovascular events like a heart attack or a stroke, a 50% lower risk of vascular dementia, and even evidence that it might slow down biological aging at the cellular level. This is really about total body health.
So we've seen some powerful evidence for prevention. But honestly, maybe the most shocking discovery to come out of all this research is the idea that the vaccine might not just prevent dementia, but it could actually help people who are already living with the disease.
Yeah, let's go back to that Welsh study one more time. The researchers looked at the group of people who already had a dementia diagnosis when the vaccine program started. Over the next 9 years, almost half of the unvaccinated group died from dementia. But among those who went ahead and got the vaccine, only 30%. That is a huge difference, and it strongly suggests the vaccine might actually be slowing down the progression of the disease itself.
When you boil it all down, the shingles vaccine seems to be so much more than just a way to prevent a rash. Its real power is in stopping those recurring, chronic inflammatory attacks from a virus that's waking up again and again. By keeping things calm, we give our brains a much better shot at staying healthy as we get older.
This excitement is captured perfectly by Dr. Pascal Geldsetzer, who was one of the lead authors on the big Stanford studies. He says the conversation is now moving beyond just prevention. The idea that a common vaccine could have a therapeutic effect on a neurodegenerative disease, that is a potential game changer. This entire story just forces us to ask a much bigger question. For so long, we've kind of studied the brain in a vacuum, all by itself. But what if the real key to its health lies in understanding its deep, intricate connection to our immune system? If a simple shingles shot can have this profound an effect, what other common vaccines or immune strategies might be protecting us in ways we haven't even begun to understand? It feels like we're on the edge of a whole new frontier in the fight for healthy aging.